Carolyn Iris Byington was born to parents Robert and Jennifer on May 30th, 1993, and grew up in Basking Ridge, New Jersey. She was sadly born with a birth defect in her brain, but thankfully was able to overcome it. She was described as a quiet and kind individual. In 2011, Carolyn graduated from Ridge High School and then from Lafayette College in Pennsylvania in 2015. She then studied abroad in Japan and worked as an English teaching assistant while there. In 2019, 26-year-old Carolyn was living in Plainsboro, New Jersey, and working as a market research project manager at Engine US, a marketing company located in Princeton, New Jersey. She had worked there since 2016, and over time, a crazed coworker of hers, 30-year-old Kenneth Saul, who worked at the company as an accountant, became obsessed with her. In April 2019, he secretly made a copy of her apartment key and used it to enter her apartment on numerous occasions without her knowledge. At one point, he installed hidden surveillance cameras so he could spy on her. Things would then escalate to the point of no return on June 10, 2019, when Carolyn unexpectedly arrived home during her lunch break and caught Saul off guard. In a panic, he hid behind a door, and when she got close to him, he beat and stabbed her to death. Her screams were so loud that customers inside the nearby Apple store could hear them. When Carolyn failed to show back up to work, her concerned coworkers called the police and asked them to do a welfare check on her. When officers entered her apartment that evening, they discovered her body. As for Saul, when he arrived back at work late, he told his supervisor he was late because he had to bring his car in for repairs. However, investigators would later discover that was a lie after he was spotted on surveillance in Plainsboro at 2:04 p.m. on the day of Carolyn's murder. Plus, they noticed he now had cuts on his hands and knuckles. After Carolyn's murder, coworkers said that his demeanor began to change. He even asked coworkers if people could be arrested on circumstantial evidence. It didn't take investigators long to figure out that he was responsible. Saul had been married to his high school sweetheart for close to 2 years and had an infant daughter. He and his family lived 50 miles away in Lindenwold, New Jersey, and that's where he was arrested 2 months later when the DNA from the crime scene matched his DNA. He then did himself no favors in jail by conspiring with another inmate to hire someone to commit a murder identical to Carolyn's murder so that investigators would think the killer was still on the loose. He would eventually admit to that crime and admitted to conspiring to have a witness murdered. He even hired an attorney before he was arrested in order to find out more information about the case. In the end, he pleaded guilty to first-degree conspiracy to commit murder and second-degree conspiracy to commit witness tampering in connection with the 2 failed murder plots. He received 45 years for the murder charge and 10 years for the conspiracy and witness tampering charge. Gayle Carolyn Barrus was born in 1958. In 1988, 30-year-old Gayle was a loving mother of 3 living in Battle Creek, Michigan. Unfortunately, in the fall of that year, a horrible tragedy occurred. On October 9, 1988, Gayle was seen at the former Speed's coffee shops and then seen not far away on River Road, arguing with a man while his associates stood nearby. 2 weeks later, about 100 yards from his location, hunters found her body. She had been sexually assaulted and stabbed to death. Thankfully, they were able to collect evidence from the crime scene that would later be tested for DNA. A possible suspect in the case is 24-year-old Roger Plato. However, Plato was shot to death on October 22, 1988, 3 days before Gayle's body was found, when he physically assaulted Detective Alan Toff and then tried to flee. If he did have any information about Gayle's murder, he took it to the grave with him. Plato's roommate, Richard Compton, was also questioned but denied any involvement or knowledge of her murder. He died in 2009 and was excluded by DNA in 2019 after investigators had his body exhumed. A year earlier, Gayle's son, 45-year-old James Barrus, who was 13 when his mother was murdered, contacted Battle Creek police for an update and to request his mother's case file. That's when it was discovered that Plato's DNA had never been tested against the biological DNA from the crime scene. However, they couldn't find the vial of blood that was taken from him after his death and got a sample from a relative, but the results were inconclusive. In 2020, while an officer was doing an inventory of the evidence in the collection at the department, they found the vial of blood that had been taken from Plato. The blood was then sent to the state police lab, and it confirmed that Plato was indeed Gayle's killer. Even though justice was never served, her family at least has some long-awaited answers. On May 17, 1999, when Saad Kawaf walked into the garage to leave for work, he was attacked by two people. His wife, Samar, heard screaming and rushed out there just in time to see an unknown man in a violent, all-out struggle with Saad. Saad was a businessman who owned a convenience store in Jacksonville, Florida, where he and his family lived in the Deerwood Country Club neighborhood. He and his wife were also big-time contributors to refugees in Bosnia and Kosovo. He had also recently learned that an intelligence division unit was investigating him for not reporting cash transactions that totaled around $407,000. It's clear they made a lot of money, which brings us back to the intruders at their home. Samar tried to assist her husband against the attacker, but was stopped by the female intruder. She then retaliated by biting the woman's arm. The woman then told Saad and Samar that she would shoot them both if they didn't give the money. So Samar gathered up about $500 and gave it to them, but they wanted more. The male intruder then stabbed Saad to near death before turning his attention to Samar. After holding a knife to her neck and demanding more money, she went to the kitchen cabinet and gave them $30,000. She was then bound with duct tape, including over her mouth, and then attached to a chair. They once again demanded more money, and by the time they were done, they had approximately $53,000. Once the intruders were happy with the amount of money they had, they fled the scene. Samar was then able to free herself and check on Saad, who was dying from multiple stab wounds. He was rushed to the hospital, but sadly didn't survive. Investigators were thankfully able to collect DNA from the crime scene, but the case would still go unsolved for the next 21 years. In 2020, they were finally able to identify the suspect as Billy Bear, a former detective with the Jacksonville Police Department. He worked on the same unit that was investigating Saad. 6 days after he was identified, the female DNA test results matched to his ex-wife, Melissa Schaefer. It turns out that after Bear learned Saad's deposit schedule, which involved large amounts of cash, he hatched a plan to rob him. To get close to the couple, Bear and Schaefer posed as real estate agents. When Bear was identified, he was already retired from law enforcement after serving for 27 years. He joined in 1975 and retired in 2002, 3 years after the murder. He then enjoyed 18 years of his retirement before finally being arrested.
You know this gentleman right here?
Never saw him before.
Never saw him before?
At least I don't remember him.
Never?
But
Never recognized you? The name doesn't sound familiar?
No.
Ever been in his house?
Look, if you're going to ask me any more questions, because I don't remember any of this.
Well, I am asking you questions.
I know, but I guess my point being is, obviously you're accusing me of doing something to this
What
guy.
would you think I'm accusing you of?
I don't know, but I want a lawyer.
Okay. All right.
Because obviously you're accusing me of something.
On July 1st and 2nd of 2020, Bear and Schaefer were arrested for the murder of Saad. Schaefer pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and 4 other charges and was sentenced to 29 years to life in prison. Bear also pleaded guilty to first-degree murder, kidnapping, armed robbery, and aggravated battery and was given life in prison without the possibility of parole. Saad might not have been the first person Bear ever murdered and robbed. A year earlier, a cop named Carl Walden, who worked with Bear, was convicted of killing a man named Sammy Safar, who owned a store in Northside, Florida. Sammy, just like Saad, was known for keeping large amounts of cash on hand. During Walden's trial, Bear testified against him, along with an ex-homicide detective who retired right before the trial. Some believe Walden was wrongfully convicted and that Bear put the blame on him to save himself. It's of note that Walden's brother-in-law, James Swift Jr., who also worked as a Jacksonville police officer, was also arrested and received multiple charges ranging from homicide to robberies. Hopefully, all of Bear's cases he was involved in will now be re-looked at. Todd Allen Morgan was born in Grand Rapids, Michigan on May 19, 1981, the second son to parents Cecil and Sandy. After graduating high school in 1999, Todd took a 6-week backpacking trip to explore the European countryside. He loved it so much that he continued traveling to Europe multiple times over the years. In 2005, Todd graduated from Cleveland State University with a bachelor's degree in business administration. A year later, he earned his master's degree in business administration. He then earned his PhD in the same field from Kent State University in 2015. His first job was as an assistant professor at the University of Massachusetts Lowell. He then taught at Hayworth College of Business at Western Michigan University before joining his alma mater, Cleveland State University, in 2021. He had also worked as an account executive for Unilever and as a senior marketing analyst and data modular for Amerimark. By the time he was 41, he was a divorced father of 2, living in Hudson, Ohio, and working as an assistant professor in the Department of Management at the Monte Ahua College of Business. He was described as a kind and dedicated individual who was well-liked and respected by his students. He had been married to Teresa Reagan for about 10 years before the divorce, and they had a son and daughter together. Sadly, in the spring of 2023, Todd began using an online dating app, which eventually led to a horrible tragedy. On April 19, 2023, police officers arrived at Todd's home after he failed to pick up his 4-year-old daughter from school. When they entered the home, they shockingly found Todd dead from multiple gunshot wounds. Several shell casings were located inside his home, and a bloody shoe print was found on the back deck. Neighbors had also heard the gunshots and said they saw a light-colored vehicle in the driveway and a person with long, black hair leaving the scene. It wouldn't take long to identify the killer because while they were at the home, they accidentally called 911 from their cell phone, but quickly hung up when they noticed. 911 tried to call the number back, but there was no answer. Investigators were able to trace that cell phone back to a woman named Tariana Paschal, and 5 weeks later, on May 27th, she was arrested in Akron, Ohio for the murder of Todd. It turns out that Todd had met Paschal on an online dating site, and they had been communicating for a while. The day of the murder was the first time they ever met in person. 2 burned cigars found at the scene were tested for DNA and matched to Paschal. They also found photos online of Paschal smoking the same brand of cigars. After she shot Todd 7 times, she took his phone and fled the scene. Investigators were able to locate the phone after she discarded it along the highway in nearby Macedonia. In the end, Paschal pleaded guilty to a charge of aggravated murder and was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 23 years. Her computer records revealed that she was very active on dating sites and apps. They also found evidence of her searching for details about the case on a daily basis. However, you are probably wondering why she murdered him, but I'm sorry to say that she has never told the reason. Why do you think she did it? Let me know in the comments below. In 2020, Trevon and Jasmine Hall had a son together in Riceville, Tennessee, but their relationship wouldn't last, and they began sharing custody of the child. Meanwhile, Jasmine had started dating 38-year-old Curtis Smith, and together they would destroy the lives of multiple people. On Saturday, September 25, 2021, at around 8 a.m., Jasmine and Curtis showed up at Trevon's camper in Athens, Tennessee, with guns to get her 10-month-old son. When they entered the camper, they found Trevon and 5 other people, including 24-year-old Skylar Hahn, 40-year-old Jesse Dupree, 39-year-old Brandy Harris, Jesse's fiancé Stephen Lemke, and an unnamed female. Jasmine grabbed her son from Trevon and then shot him in the face. She and Curtis started to leave when she turned to him and said, and I quote, "What are you doing? Don't leave no one alive." She then handed the gun to Curtis, who proceeded to shoot Trevon once more before turning the gun on Skylar, Jesse, and Brandy, shooting them all twice. He also shot Stephen in the head, causing him to fall to the floor. However, unbeknownst to Curtis, the bullet only grazed Stephen's head and he survived. The unknown female also survived after pretending to be dead, and after Jasmine and Curtis fled, she and Stephen were able to escape to safety. After 911 was called and the police arrived, they found Stephen and the female alive outside. They quickly directed officers to the bloodbath inside. Multiple agencies got involved in tracking down Jasmine and Curtis, and finally located them in a home just over the line into Polk County, Tennessee. They were arrested and charged with 4 counts of premeditated murder and attempted first-degree murder. In the end, they both pleaded guilty, and Jasmine was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Curtis, on the other hand, received 4 life sentences and an additional 28 years.